This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 518, part 2, entitled The Long Gender War. Continuing straight on. To masculists, the divorce courts are a slaughterhouse, since they have been taken over by the fluffy feminist hypocrites and genociders. Masculists have a real hatred of the fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges, because they are seen by the masculists to be hypocritical in the sense that they want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but behave as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts, financially crucifying and destroying the lives of one father in 4. They are seen by the masculists as genociders, since they have made divorce so toxic for men that they have made marriage and paternity toxic for men. So in many countries now, 2/3 of young men refuse to marry and reject paternity, thus crashing the birth rate. But the root cause of this is the toxicity and deep misandry of the hated fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies, seeing them as manslavers. Masculists have an even deeper hatred of fluffy feminists, since it's bad enough that they are fluffies and hence decades-lasting manslavers, but are also hypocrites and genociders who have to be stopped with bullets if necessary, since responsible males, masculist soldiers, will not tolerate that these monoconscious, misandrous feminists who control the divorce courts indirectly wipe out whole populations, which is what they are currently doing. Thus the masculists feel thoroughly justified in expressing their anger and hatred at these monoconscious, misandrous feminazis, whom they label MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, who remain totally closed-minded to the idea that gender oppression is a two-way street. My former girlfriend, whom I was with for 2 years, was an MFB. She never had an intuitive, emotional understanding of masculinist hatred towards MFBs. She only reacted to the male hatred, totally failing to understand where and why that hatred originated. It was the issue that broke us up. I will talk about this a bit further later. More recently, I had a month-long girlfriend who had a double PhD, so no fool, who, the moment she learned that I was a masculist who preached hatred of MFBs for what they are doing to men, destroying the lives of millions of men, she cut the relationship on a dime by bringing in her gorilla son to force me out of her house within minutes. This gorilla woman was obviously totally closed-minded to the idea that masculists had plenty of reason to be hateful towards what women are doing to men. She was utterly ignorant of masculinist ideas, was obviously deeply monoconscious, and had the attitude which she actually expressed to me as her parting words, quote, "What you wrote was deeply offensive to women. This relationship is ended. Don't contact me further." End quote. This woman obviously thought that it was taboo for men to criticize women. What hypocrisy, given that she was a strong feminist who certainly criticized men, but she was too blindly monoconscious to see that hypocrisy. So, given the above, you may now have a better idea of what the masculists will be up against in the coming gender war. That will probably be longer than shorter, given the strength of the misandry on the part of the monoconscious feminists. So what can the masculists do, given these realities? One obvious thing to do is to continue to educate men about the massive, decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men, particularly decades-lasting manslavery, paternity fraud, the mara but no para, no gender equality committees for men in the parliaments, etc. I'm starting to hear reports in the manosphere claiming that more and more women are reacting towards the ever-growing number of men who have wiped their hands of women. That's not difficult to do nowadays, given that 40% of women are obese and 30% are fat. So for slim men, 2/3 of women have made themselves unfuckable. Since women's vaginas are their only real source of attraction to men, women who are unfuckable are easily ignored and left to rot on the shelf, as is now happening to millions of repulsive feminazi women who care more about food than anything else, even their own life expectancy. The dumb fucks. But that's just the beginning. Now that the manosphere has its own video hosting sites, the expansion of masculist and MGTOW thought is growing rapidly, to the point now that in many countries, most young men have got the message that marriage and paternity are toxic, because divorce is toxic and not something that a smart man does. Young women now, increasingly, are really starting to panic, because they are noticing with boyfriend after boyfriend that these young men refuse to give them their sperm, thus forcing these young women to be babyless, which is driving them crazy. So in the next few years, we can expect that millions of young women will do a U-turn in their attitudes towards the masculists and start expressing publicly pro-masculist attitudes in an attempt to persuade some gullible man-slavable man to give her his sperm. But intelligent masculists will not give women their sperm until the gender laws are well and truly men-fared. That is, the divorce courts need to be thoroughly reformed, making them man-friendly. The para needs to be legislated, so too the OPTAP, that's obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births, to combat women's paternity fraud, and especially the establishment of the GECs, the GECs, Gender Equality Committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are treated equally, which is far from being the case today in today's highly monoconscious environment. Thus, top priority for the moment for the masculists and MGTOWs is the education of the public, to teach them bi-consciousness, so that everyone knows that gender oppression is a two-way street, that women oppress men too, and in fact worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, making them more serious than the relatively mild ways that men oppress women. For example, for masculists, even rape is considered small beer compared to women's, to fluffies, decades-lasting man slavery. Masculists in their large numbers in the near future need to stand up in feminist meetings and push their masculist agenda, giving the women in these audiences the clear message that their days of gender political monopoly that they have had for the past 6 decades are over, and that if they don't become bi-conscious faster than their currently monoconscious male feminist boyfriends, then, since masculists are teaching these boyfriends, masculist and MGTOW ideas, these men will become bi-conscious and view the monoconsciousness of their feminist girlfriends as bigotry, seeing them as MFBs, become disgusted with them and then dump them. When this process occurs in millions of cases, women will be forced to adapt to this fundamental change in the gender political ecology, as men wake up to the masculist message and see fluffies as hateable manslavers, and see fluffy feminists as even more hateable hypocrites and genociders, and then punish their monoconscious feminist girlfriends by dumping them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, spat at for being misandrist feminazi shits who don't deserve a man and hence don't get one. This masculist message will terrify young women, so they will be forced to adapt to masculists' demands on women, that is, to fip up, to vote with men for the men fairing of the gender laws, or men will continue to boycott giving women their sperm, and humanity will die out. Sooner or later, the gender politicians will be forced to listen to what the masculists have to say, or we die out. We men are half the population, so need to be given a voice. The feminazis don't want that to happen. For example, Susan Wojcicki and the like. So in the limit, masculists will kill them. But for the average woman in the street, if she wants to have a man in her life, she will have to become bi-conscious, or she will rot on the shelf. When there are millions, tens of millions of masculists and MGTOWs, there will be millions, tens of millions of bi-conscious women. It's only a question of time, but I don't think the gender war will be soon over, since most women, most feminists, are very powerfully brainwashed into being monoconscious. It will take time to crush that attitude out of them by the masculists. In other words, we are in for a long gender war. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, and e-textbook of 510 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.